we'll be here to help. Information on the APPR and on the CTA's services for air passengers can be found at airpassengerprotection.ca. Air travel is integral to modern life. And thanks to these new regulations, the air travel experience is about to become more predictable for Canadians. Canadians will have and they'll be properly informed of a common set of rights when they board a plane. Je tiens à remercier tous les intervenants et les voyageurs qui nous ont communiqué des renseignements et fait part de leurs idées durant les différentes périodes de consultation. Le RPPA s'inspire de leurs réflexions et tient compte de leur expertise. I also want to thank the CTA officials and all the public servants who helped organize consultations, analyze feedback, develop options, and draft the APPR. Their hard work and professionalism were indispensable in getting us to these groundbreaking regulations just a year after the legislation that gave us a mandate to make these regulations came into force. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us at today's announcement. This is a very important day for Canadian air travelers and airlines. With that, the Minister and I would be happy to take your questions.
So that is incorrect information that you've just given me. There has not been a regulation in Canada until today that stipulates that after 3 hours, all carriers must go to disembarkation with respect to tarmac delays. Some airlines in the past have put in their tariffs that they would disembark after a specific amount of time, but that was individual decisions by airlines that they put in their tariff. There has never been a regulation that specifies the amount of time. Now, for comparison purposes, in the United States, the tarmac delay for domestic flights is 3 hours in regulation. It is 4 hours for domestic flights. In the case of Europe, there are no specified times with respect to having to disembark passengers.
You say the Montreal Convention then has not been incorporated into Canadian law, that is not a standard for air travel across the globe?
There has never been a regulation, Canadian regulation, stipulating that all airlines must, after 3 hours, and by the way, during those 3 hours, as you will see if you look at the regulations, we have now put in standards of treatment with respect, and I mentioned it, with respect to informing people, with respect to having access to the bathroom, with respect to air conditioning, heating, regular status updates. Those are things that we have incorporated within that window. You have to realize, of course, that people who are sitting in an airplane because of a tarmac delay, what they really want to do is to get to their destination. So we gave a great deal of thought to what that period of time would be, and also taking into account operational realities that if you make the decision that you're going to go back to the ramp, to the airport terminal, that you can actually end up spending even more time before you get to your destination. So we gave this a great deal of thought, and it is now in the regulation. It is 3 hours. Anything that was before that did not apply. So the 3 hours is what we said we would do, and the 3 hours is what applies. But let me give you an example. Let's say, and anybody who has lived here in Canada in the winter will know that, let's say that after those 3 hours, you're third from in line from getting de-iced, and it's only going to take another 30 or 40 minutes before you get there. There is, at that point, some leeway for the pilot to have a little bit of extra time, because inside of that 45 additional minutes, there is an imminent possibility of departure. So we've added that flexibility. If after 3 hours it doesn't look like the situation is going to change, then that airplane must go back and offer disembarkation. So I can quote at least 5 things that have changed between the time that we published the proposed regulations in December and the regulations that we are announcing today. So there were changes that were made. One of them was standards of treatment when you are facing a tarmac delay. All of the things that I mentioned to you to try to make life better for the people who are living through this tarmac delay. That is something that was not in the first proposed regulations. Another example that I can give you is that we make a differentiation between large airlines and small airlines, and we changed that threshold from 1 million passengers per year to 2 million passengers per year, because we listened to the smaller airlines and the ultra low-cost carriers and felt that that was the proper decision. There are 5 decisions that were changed as a result of the consultations.
Minister, there was some mention about the reimbursement for passengers if they're bumped from the flights. Could we go over those numbers again? And because it seems to me that some international flights are going to be more expensive than the compensation that you folks are guaranteeing in the regulations.
Well, the airlines are still obliged to get you to your destination or to fully refund you. But on top of that, you get compensation. On top of that, if it is 0 to 3 hours, it's a compensation. If you are 0 to 6 hours, if you are bumped off your flight because of overbooking, you will get $900 compensation. And that will have to be paid within 48 hours. If it is between 6 and 9 hours, it will be $1,800, and if it is over 9 hours, it will be $2,400. And that is with respect, the timing that I gave you there is with respect to the time that it takes you to get to your final destination.
How do passengers know what's within the airline's control?
So the regulations that we've announced today are very well spelled out. I mentioned the website. The Canadian Transportation Agency has got all of those out, and Scott has mentioned that there will be campaigns to inform people. One of our objectives here was to try to make it as clear and as understandable as possible. Most people who buy air tickets quite often don't look at all that small print that accompanies a ticket, and we've tried, because sometimes it's quite complicated to understand. One of our objectives was clear communications, and that information is available now on the Canadian Transportation Agency website, and it will be disseminated by the airlines in a very thorough manner so that people do understand what their rights are, what the obligations of the airlines are, what is within their control, what is not within their control.
Can we get an example of that
please,
now? Can you perhaps expand on that?
If I could just step in on the specific, on your initial question. So you're talking about if there's a delay or a cancellation, how would the passenger know, correct?
How would the passenger know if it's within the
Airline's control. So the regulations require that airlines communicate in real time to passengers, including when there's a delay or a cancellation or any other flight disruption, including communicating the reason for that delay, that cancellation, the tarmac delay. So airlines are obligated every 30 minutes to provide an update and to tell passengers what's going on. So that, in the first instance, is exactly how passengers will know what the reason is for the delay or cancellation. If for some reason a passenger doesn't believe an airline is being forthright, if they have concerns, they can always turn to the CTA, and we have the power to look into it and to examine the data. So they'll have the information from the airlines, and there's a fail-safe in their ability to turn to us. So the authority to make the regulations that Parliament created was to make regulations in terms of airlines' obligations vis-a-vis passengers. So these regulations apply to the airlines. Having said that, the airlines work within what you might call a supply chain. and airports play a role in that. So while the regulations themselves don't apply to airports, we at the CTA obviously expect that airports and airlines and other partners in the air travel system will work together to try to ensure the smoothest possible travel experience.
Well, first of all, I did see that, and that's incorrect. I was quoted as saying that we are backing off simulator training. Let me give you a little bit of quick background here. When the FAA began to look into what happened with the two flights, the one in Indonesia and the one in Ethiopia, there was talk of finding a solution, but then also that the training associated with that would not require simulator training. I spoke up at that time and said it's way too early to discount simulator training. Simulator training has great value, might have been useful as well after the first incident to provide more simulator training, which was not a requirement. So it is important to look at it. We need to see what the final solution will be in terms of fixing the problem. But one of the great advantages of simulator training, and I've spent thousands of hours in simulators, is this. One of the first things that the pilot has to do is to recognize the problem. And you recognize the problem best when you are in a simulator because you've got a high-fidelity version of the cockpit. The second thing is you must then react. What are you going to do about it? And in some cases, it's not just a question of going through a set of steps. You must do it in a timely fashion. So for pilots who are training, simulator training is extremely valuable. So the point that I have been making is that we should not at this point discount simulator training. We'll wait to see what the final solution is, but it is premature to say that there is no requirement for simulator training.
Est-ce que vous pourriez répéter en français?
Could you repeat that in French, please?
Sur la même question?
On the same question?
Oui, alors j'ai été
Yes.
mal cité dans le New
So
York
I
Times
was
en disant que
misquoted
je
in
ne
the New
pensais
York
pas que
Times saying that I
l'entraînement dans les
didn't believe
simulateurs était
that training
nécessaire
in simulators was
quand
necessary
une solution va être
when
mise en place
a
pour les
solution
Max
is
8.
introduced on the
Ce
MAX
que
8s.
j'ai dit, moi,
What I
c'est
actually
que,
said myself
l'entraînement par
was that
simulateur est
training
très,
on
très
simulators
important
is
pour les
extremely
pilotes parce que
important for pilots
c'est ils
because
sont dans un cockpit de
they're
haute
in
fidélité.
a high-fidelity
La première chose
cockpit,
que le pilote
and the
doit
first
faire,
thing
c'est
that
de
the pilot
reconnaître
has
le
to do
problème et
is
de le
to
comprendre,
recognize there's
et
a
ensuite
problem,
de
understand
réagir.
it, and
Et
then
vraiment,
react.
un simulateur est la
So
meilleure façon
there, a
d'apprendre
simulator
et
is
de
really the best
mémoriser,
way to learn
les
and to
différentes
memorize
étapes qui
the
doivent
various
être
steps
prises
that need to
quand
be
un problème
followed
survient.
when a problem
Alors, ce
arises.
que j'ai
So
dit quand,
what I said
quand on a parlé au début
when
d'un
we
entraînement qui
discussed
nécessitait
about
pas un
training that
simulateur,
did not
c'est que j'ai
need
dit que c'était
simulators
prématuré
was that
de-
it was
d'exclure
premature
l'importance
to
des
rule
simulateurs
out to the
et qu'on
importance of
devrait
simulators
attendre
and
pour
that
voir
we
quelle est
should
la
wait to
solution
see
qui est proposée,
exactly what solution
par,
is
Boeing
proposed
et
by
la
Boeing
FAA.
and the FAA.
Sur cette charte des
On
passagers,
the
est-ce que vous
passenger
mettez un
rights
minimum
charter,
sur les indemnités parce qu'on parle de jusqu'à
will there be any
2400,
cap
jusqu'à 1000,
on
mais est-ce qu'il peut y avoir
the
un minimum que les gens peuvent s'attendre?
financial compensation, and is there
En
also a
faisant
minimum?
en deux vagues, est-ce que ça
And
donne
we're
pas
talking about
justement,
two waves here.
ça donne un avantage aux compagnies aériennes?
Does
et
that
les
not
passagers
provide
sont
an
un peu oubliés
advantage
là-dedans?
to the airlines and to the
Alors,
detriment of
on
passengers?
a pris en considération
Well,
le fait
we
que
did take into
ces nouveaux
consideration the
règlements
fact
sont
that these new
quand même,
regulations
assez complexes
are
et
fairly
que ça prend un
complex
certain temps
and
pour
that
les
it will
lignes
take a certain
aériennes
amount
de
of time
mettre
for
en
the
place,
airlines to actually
toutes les mesures qui vont
introduce
être
all the
nécessaires pour pouvoir
measures that are
respecter ces
needed in
règlements-là.
order to
Celles
comply
que-
with those
qui
regulations.
deviendront, effectivement, qui seront en place d'ici le 15 juillet.
The
peuvent
ones
se
that are in
faire
place by
relativement
July
rapidement. Il faut dire que
15th,
les
well,
lignes
those are
aériennes
fairly
savent que
simple, and the
ça
airlines
s'en venait de
know
toute
that those
façon.
things are
Pour celles
coming,
qui
and they've
concernent
known
les
about
délais
it.
ou les cancellations
With respect to delays or
le
cancellations,
positionnement des sièges
or
pour les
the
familles, pour que les
positioning
enfants soient
of
accoudés,
seating
un petit peu plus
for
complexe,
children
et
or
puis,
families with
on a
children,
décidé
that's a
de
bit
leur
more
donner
complex,
jusqu'au
and we
15 décembre.
decided to give them
On
until
réalise
December
aussi en même
15th.
temps que
We
plusieurs
also
lignes aériennes en
realized
ce
that a
moment
number
font
of
face au
airlines at
problème
this
des Max
time
8.
are
Et
dealing
alors,
with the
on a-
MAX
on a pris
8
en
problem, so
considération
we took
que
that into
ils ont certains
consideration
défis ces jours-ci qui ont rien à
because
faire avec ça. Alors,
right
on
now
a
they're having
décidé que
certain
c'était,
issues that have nothing to do with
parfaitement
that. So
acceptable de leur
we
donner un
felt
petit
it
peu
would be
plus de temps. Ils
acceptable
aimeraient en
to
avoir
give them a
encore plus,
bit
mais on
more
a
time. They
vu
wanted
que
even more
les
time
dates
than
qu'on
that,
a décidé
but we
d'utiliser
decided
étaient raisonnables.
that these were reasonable dates.
Et pour la première partie de votre question, donc, en ce
And
qui
on the
concerne
first
la
part of your
compensation,
question, with respect
les
to
niveaux de compensation
compensation,
pour un délai,
the levels of compensation
c'est
for a delay
$400 pour un délai de 3 à
are
6 heures.
$400 for a delay from 3 to
C'est
6 hours,
$700 pour un
and
délai de 6 heures à
$700
9
for
heures,
a delay of
et
6 to 9
$1,000
hours,
pour un
and
délai de
$1,000
plus
for
que
a
9
delay
heures. C'est pour
of more
la
than
grande
9 hours.
majorité de compagnies
And that
aériennes,
reflects what happens with most airlines,
plus grands, ou les
or
grandes
the
compagnies
largest
aériennes.
airlines,
Pour
if
les
you
petites
will.
compagnies aériennes,
Now, with respect
les
to the
niveaux
small
sont,
airlines, the levels are
$125,
$125,
$250
and
et $500
$250 and
pour ces trois niveaux.
$500 for
Ce
those
sont
3 different
les,
levels.
la compensation pour les délais.
That is
La
compensation for
pour le
delays.
bumping,
Now,
en bon français,
compensation for
la
bumping
compensation pour le bumping, c'est $900
is
pour un
$900
délai de
for a delay
jusqu'à 6
of
heures.
up to 6 hours,
$1,800 pour un
and
délai de 6
$1,800
heures
for
à
a
9
delay
heures,
of up to
et
6 to 9 hours, and
$2,400 pour un délai de
$2,400
plus
for a
que 9
delay of more than
Donc,
9
il y a un
hours.
minimum et un
So
maximum.
there's a minimum and a maximum.
The new air passenger protection regulations apply to all flights to, from, and within Canada, whether they're operated by Canadian Airlines or foreign airlines.
When it comes to compensation, it has to be compensation when it's within an airline's control. Here, it looks like there's a bit of gray area when it comes to mechanical problems. Is that loophole still present that an airline can say, well, we've had a mechanical problem, sorry, no compensation for you? And if so, why give them that out?
So if there is a mechanical problem, let's look at a hypothetical situation. Passengers have boarded, the pilot is doing pre-flight checks, and a problem is discovered, an avionics problem or what have you. We don't want that airplane to be flying. Safety is number one consideration. So there are still requirements with respect to standards of treatment and rebooking those people. It's not just get off the plane, you're on your own. So standards of treatment, because there may be delays involved, and so there's compensation, not compensation, but there are standards of treatment with respect to food and water, and in some cases possibly even hotel accommodation, and a rebooking requirement. So that is still in place. Our concern is that we want to make sure that no airplane is going to go and fly, and we don't believe that. We know the airlines fully realize that if there's a mechanical problem, and these things can happen, that it's not a good idea for that airplane to fly. Now, there is one exception. If during standard routine maintenance, which all airplanes undergo when they go to the hangar, there's scheduled maintenance, if a problem comes up there during that time, and that airplane is no longer available, there is compensation, because we consider that in that case, a replacement aircraft should have been available.
For any mechanical issue, though, should passengers be on the hook for an airline's mechanical issues?
What I'm saying to you is that no technology is 100% perfect, and so these things can happen, and I think you acknowledge that that can happen. And we feel that in that situation we have requirements with respect to passengers, and those requirements are with respect to standards of treatment and rebooking. But that is different from our point of view with respect to other kinds of reasons that are fully within the control of the airline.
What then counts as not within the control of the airline? Weather emergencies, what else?
So weather emergencies, let's say there's a massive air traffic control failure, if there is a union strike that could occur and suddenly airport operations are shut down. If there was some other event at the airport, perhaps a terrorist threat that required a whole bunch of things to be done to secure the airport, those are things that are not the fault of the airline, and we have to recognize that.
How specific do the airlines have to be when they are updating their passengers? And what is in place to ensure that maintenance issues aren't being used as a loophole to prevent compensation of passengers?
I find it preposterous to suggest that an airline would invent a maintenance problem to not fly. Airlines are in the business of flying and of serving their customers, because that's the business that they're in. And secondly, We know, because every time there is a delay, that information has to be filed. Transport Canada has full access to it, and if the Canadian Transportation Agency wants to see that information, they have full access to it.
Minister,
I'm sorry, I didn't get the...
Sorry, will passengers get that kind of information? You know, how specific are the
Yes,
airlines
yes.
when they're updating?
This is the first part that I talked about, the clear communications. The requirement not to keep passengers in the dark, to have regular status updates. Why is it that the airplane is not, why aren't they closing the door? Why aren't we backing off our ramp? These are things that need to be explained to passengers, and it's a very, very important part of the passenger rights, is to keep passengers informed.
So to continue with that theme, you know, when we consulted on these regulations across the country, in fact, the question of communication was one of the most consistent themes we heard across the country. One of the things that the Canadians told us is that it's not only important to have a clear and consistent set of rights, but it's important to know what their rights are, and that it lowers stress levels and it allows everybody to kind of figure out their next steps when they've got real-time communication on what's happening during a flight delay. So as the Minister said, the communication obligation is there in the regulations. We're going to also be releasing guidance material to help both passengers and airlines understand what the expectation is there. And needless to say, the baseline expectation is accuracy. That goes without saying. But beyond that, we expect airlines to provide passengers with sufficient information so they can understand what the reason is for the delay and also how long that delay is likely to last.
Minister, Mr. Strider, why should flyers, consumers feel that you're going to enforce these new rules any more than you enforced the previous rules, the tariffs and the Montreal Convention? Because, as you know, a lot of your critics don't think you were very tough on the airlines when you had those regulations to enforce. Why should consumers feel any better about this and how you'll enforce them than they did before? Take that.
Sure. Well, Sean, I think I would say a couple of things to that. The first thing is, this is the first time that we're going to have a clear, consistent set of rules that apply to all the airlines. Up until now, airlines' commitments to passengers, airlines' obligations, have been based upon their individual tariffs. The airlines have each made their own decision on their tariffs. And so enforcing those tariffs has required, in many cases, individual complaints from consumers and individual investigations. Now we're going to have a baseline that applies to everybody. But I would go further. I would say that, in fact, the CTA, as the enforcement body, I think has demonstrated, including most recently through the inquiry into the Sunwing flight delays, that we take compliance with the rules very seriously. These rules have been put into place in order to ensure that Canadian travelers are well protected and in order to create predictability and a level playing field for all concerned, including the airlines. And the rules' impact will be based in part upon consistent compliance with them. So we have every intention of undertaking a program of education, of monitoring, and of enforcement to make sure that the regulations are followed.
Minister, a follow-up question on the issue of what is and is not in control of an airline. You mentioned problems with avionics. There's never and spilling luggage all over the place, and there's never and there's always a problem somewhere. Okay, let's say I'm flying to Glasgow and I get a text message from my airline saying there's a screw loose in the engine. We can't fly you today. Is that in their control?
So give me a little bit more information on the situation. You're in the plane.
No. Let's say I'm here in the terminal.
Yes.
I'm ready to board. Text
Yes.
message from the airline says, no, there's a mechanical problem with our engine on your on your plane. You can't go today. Is that the airline's problem, or is that just avionics?
So that is a mechanical problem that has cropped up at the last minute. If it's something that originated during a scheduled maintenance, you will be entitled to compensation because they should have had a replacement aircraft. If it happened just at the last minute, and these kinds of things can happen, what you will be entitled to is standards of treatment because you're going to be delayed and a rebooking to another flight.
There's allegations that the government, that the agency met with the airlines a year before the public consultations ever began to speak about the regulations with those airlines. Did that happen or not?
We speak to the airlines all the time. We may have given them signals that we were going to put passenger rights on the table and we were going to negotiate this, but otherwise they've just been a stakeholder like everybody else, and they have made their views known very clearly, and they've participated between, and I'll turn this to Scott, between the end of May last summer and the end of August. There was a consultation period, and also 60 days the first 2 months of this year. So airlines have gone out publicly and done their public lobbying on their views on this whole thing. But this is something that was focused on passenger rights. That was the primary motivation, that we wanted to ensure that passenger rights would be respected. If you are a person and you've got a family and you've got 2 kids and you plan that dream holiday a year from now, and you have spent a lot of money to go on that holiday, and at the last minute, through no fault of your own, and through a decision made by the airline that was within their control, your flight is delayed or canceled or you're overbooked, you deserve compensation. That is what drove the last 2 years of effort. People have been talking about passenger rights now for, I would say, at least a decade, as long as I've been in Parliament. We finally did it.
Because there are those that are going to say that this is an airline bill of rights, not an air passenger bill of rights. If I'm reading this correctly, for example, that labor disputes are no longer recognized as something within the airline's control.
Well, if you've listened to the airlines in the past 2 months, you would not conclude that they feel that this was an airline's bill of rights. Thank you very much. Merci.
Members of the media who are interested in setting up interviews with Mr. Striner are invited to visit the media table. Also, at noon today, there will be a
Thank you very much. I have to tell you that personally, myself, and I know that Scott shares the same feeling with me, we are delighted that this day has finally happened, because we've been working on this for a very, very long time. I would like to acknowledge that, first of all, that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, as well as the ancestral lands of the Huron-Wendat. Now, since 2015, our government has wanted to create a world-leading air passenger rights regime that will work for Canadian travelers. Buying an air ticket can be a very big expense for Canadian families. I want all families who purchase plane tickets to know that our government is looking out for them. They deserve fair and consistent treatment. When we buy a plane ticket, that ticket is a contract with obligations for both the airline and the traveler. Today, we are announcing regulations that will help ensure the airlines live up to the commitments that they have made to travelers. Les passagers aériens méritent une approche juste et équilibrée quant aux droits des passagers. Ces règlements mettent en place des normes de traitement claires, uniformes, transparente et juste pour les passagers ayant eu à vivre des situations comme le refus d'embarquement ou des délais sur l'aire de trafic. Elles s'appliqueront à tous les transporteurs et à toutes les liaisons en partance ou en destination du Canada, ainsi qu'aux vols intérieurs. Last year, we began developing regulations to strengthen air passenger rights. I want to thank the Canadian Transportation Agency, as well as my own ministry, Transport Canada, and above all, the thousands of Canadians who have taken part in the consultations for their work in creating these world-leading protections. We needed to make sure we got it right, and we finally finished today, and we think we have it right. Since I announced a draft version of these regulations in December, we have created a set of protections that are based on feedback from across the country. We heard from everyday Canadians that they were concerned about treatment during tarmac delays above and beyond the regular stresses of travel. We heard that they were concerned about not being able to board due to overbooking, or that they weren't being fairly compensated for long delays. The regulations that I am announcing today outline standards of treatment and compensation that an air carrier will need to provide during delays, cancellations, overbooking, and other situations. During tarmac delays, the standards of treatment include regular status updates, access to the washrooms, quantities of food and drink, and proper ventilation or cooling or heating. If takeoff is not imminent, within 3 hours, passengers must be allowed to disembark. Il était important de faire en sorte que les nouveaux règlements n'imposent pas un fardeau inéquitable aux transporteurs aériens et ne nuisent pas à leur compétitivité, ce qui aurait pu affecter le coût des déplacements aériens. Ces règlements seront mis en œuvre graduellement pour permettre aux transporteurs aériens de s'y ajuster. Rules for clear communication, tarmac delays, denied boarding, lost or damaged luggage, and the transportation of musical instruments will come into force on July the 15th. The more complex rules related to seating, as well as delays and cancellations, will come into force on December 15th. Our system will be world-class, offering travelers flying to, from, or within Canada with real and fair treatment standards and compensation. Unfortunately, there has been some misinformation circulating regarding these regulations. These regulations do not increase tarmac delay time, after which air carriers are required to offer passengers the option to disembark. Also, these regulations will ensure that all air carriers provide the same minimum standards of treatment to passengers during a tarmac delay. There will be penalties up to $25,000 per violation for carriers who do not provide these minimum standards. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes qui prennent un vol en partance ou à destination du Canada ou un vol intérieur doivent bénéficier d'un traitement uniforme, peu importe le transporteur qu'ils ont choisi. J'invite les Canadiens à se familiariser avec les nouveaux règlements sur protectionpassageraérien.ca. I invite all Canadians to see what protections they will have at airpassengerprotection.ca. Ils profiteront de notre approche claire et uniforme des droits des passagers aériens et de leur application élargie à tous les passagers. In Canada, we are committed to having world-leading air passenger rights. We wanted a more predictable and balanced approach. Canadians should know that their rights and air carriers should understand their obligations. I believe that we have achieved these goals with these new regulations. In Canada, air travelers will have the fair and balanced passenger rights that they deserve. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Today marks a milestone for air travel in Canada. The new air passenger